Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Been looking forward to this show for a long time. You know him, you love him. It's been a while since you've talked to him. Randal O'Toole from the Cato Institute, and also did a terrible stint at the Independence Institute where I made you suffer dramatically.
It was painful, all right.
It was painful. You know, I've known you now for, good God, over a decade, and I don't know how to ask this. What's with the Colonel Sanders tie? Every time with the Colonel Sanders tie. Is this a fetish?
Well, you know, a tie is something that a person wears only to impress other men. And
chicks dig ties, so I've been told.
The impression I want to give is that I'm an iconoclast.
You have no problem communicating that. I want to make that clear. All right, for those who don't know, you worked with us at Independence when we were trying to get the truth out about the FasTracks proposal that was passed, God, 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Holy mud. And it's been interesting for me. I know it's in the past for you, but I'm one of those guys who just can't let go of things. That the predictions that you made, the work you did, have all come true. It went wildly over budget. It was wildly underfunded. They ended up having to single track a lot of these double tracked areas. And there are areas now where, for instance, up to Longmont, even the Denver Post, who pimped this tax increase, said a train up there makes no sense at all.
Well, the reality is that train makes no sense, but none of the others made any sense either. It's just that that one makes even less sense than any of the others. But one of the predictions I made that is now coming true is that the whole point of FasTracks was not about transportation. Spending $8 billion to get 0.5% of cars off the road and provide 0.5% of commuters a way to get to work is just not worthwhile. The reason for FasTracks is so they can reshape how Denver residents live. And the way they're going to do that is they're going to concentrate almost all new development in the FasTracks corridors. They're talking about DRCOG in the city of Denver and other planners in the region are talking about putting 75% of all new housing and offices and everything else in the transit corridors. And that means people moving to Denver are going to have a much harder time finding a single-family home that they can afford to buy. And future residents, our children, our grandchildren are going to end up living in apartments all their lives because they can't afford to buy a single-family home and the government won't let them build one.
I want to get into this idea of sustainability and that the planners now, this time, the old credo keeps going, well, this time we're going to get it right. But let me talk about transit for just a minute. The love of this old technology of rail, I've been watching The Walking Dead on AMC, and good God, rail is just like the undead. You know, they just don't die. Even though they're not good for society, they suck billions of dollars out of us that could be used for real transportation solutions. Why around the country do we still have this infrastructure love for this 150-year-old technology?
Well, there's two reasons. First of all, it is extremely expensive, and that means somebody's going to make enormous profits building it. And if you make a 10% profit on whatever you build, would you rather build a $1 billion rail line or a $100 million or $10 million highway that provides just as much transportation, but only provides you with 10% or 1% as much profit? Obviously, your preference is to go for the more profitable rail line that does very little for transportation. And so we have this enormous lobby. The rail transit lobby in Washington, D.C. is 4 or 5 times larger than all the highway lobbies in Washington, D.C. put together.
Stop there for a second, because that just blows my mind, because RTD carries about 2%, maybe 2.5% of the daily commutes. I mean, it's nothing. If it disappeared...
It's actually about 4%.
Is it 4%?
Yeah.
Well,
but it's actually declined since they started building rail transit.
What a surprise.
It was higher in 1990 than it is today.
Really? So there's fewer people per capita riding transit.
Exactly.
What a surprise, because transit takes you where you don't want to go when you don't want to be there. But you're telling me for the 95% of us who drive on roads, that use roads, that lobby, I would think, would be 95% of the lobby in D.C. to get transportation dollars.
Well, there's always been this myth of a huge highway lobby. But guess what? As I said, you can make more profits building rail, and almost everybody who can build a highway gets involved in building rail. Concrete, steel, electricity, all these other things that are involved in highway construction, except asphalt. Asphalt pavement is about the only part of the highway lobby that doesn't really get involved in rail construction, and so the asphalt pavers are really the only thing that's left of the highway lobby.
There's been no better example of corporate welfare than FasTracks. You could look at their donor list of who gave to the campaign for the massive tax increase, and they've all received nice contracts in one way or the other. You said there was another reason we love rail. One, people make money. What's the other?
Well, the other is nostalgia. You know, we look back at the time when there were streetcars running everywhere, and we think that was wonderful, but we don't realize that those streetcars are so expensive that most people couldn't afford to ride them. It was a nickel fare, but in those days, a nickel was real money, and most working class people couldn't afford them. Middle class people could. So it was transportation for the middle class, and the working class, which was and still is a majority of people today, had to walk or ride bicycles to get to work.
It seems very much the same today in that transit-dependent people, people without mobility, poor people or people who can't drive for physical reasons, the subsidy, this massive subsidy, doesn't go to them. It really goes out to people in the burbs so that they can ride a train in to see a Rockies game and not pay parking. I find this so very insulting. I don't mind a subsidy to help people who need mobility, but shouldn't the cash just go to them and let them decide how to use it?
Exactly. 45 years ago, most of our transit was privately operated, and it was profitably operated. And then we decided to nationalize it, and city after city took over transit, and the reason was that transit was supposed to be needed to help low-income people and disabled people and so on. But transit agencies quickly realized that, guess what, low-income people don't vote as much as high-income people. So it makes a lot more sense to cut service to the low-income neighborhoods and run trains out to the high-income neighborhoods so they'll vote to give the transit agencies more money. And so we've ended up hurting the low-income people that transit was originally supposed to benefit.
Remarkable. All right, let's talk about US 36 for a second. I want to bring you in. There's been this hubbub, and by the way, I agree with a large part of it. This tax increase without a vote called FASTer raised all of our car fees, and it went to expand projects, including road projects. But there wasn't the transparency that usually comes in these things. But the real rub seems to be people don't like the idea that the 36 expansion, these toll lanes, are going to be owned and operated by some conglomerate out of the country. And I haven't seen people get their panties in a wad like this in a long time. It seems like it's kind of the anti-fracking crowd. They loved getting excited. How good or bad is this plan to expand HOT lanes, high occupancy toll lanes, up towards Boulder? And isn't it dangerous to let some Australian company own this? It's never been done, right?
Well, the danger of letting an Australian company own it is that they might decide that we should drive on the left-hand side of the road instead of the right-hand side of the road, the way they do in Australia. I don't think that's very likely, though. The real reason why an Australian company might end up owning this, or not owning it because it's not going to be sold, it's going to be a leasing it, is because almost all new roads in Australia and almost all new highways in Europe are built using these kinds of public-private partnerships. I call them franchises. The government says, okay, we want a road built from here to here. You get to build it. We'll let out bids to who gets to build it, and then once they get to build it, they get to toll it for 40 years, and at the end of the 40-year period, it becomes a public road. In the meantime, the private party tolls it, and the tolls pay for the road. Taxpayers are out no money. Nobody has to put up any bonds. Nobody has to take any risk except for the private party that builds the road. So since there's a lot of companies in Europe that are used to doing this, and in Australia, when an American state says we want to build some toll roads this way, it ends up being a European or Australian company or a consortium of the two bidding on it. So far, there have been a few roads built this way in the United States, so this won't be totally unprecedented. But most of the ones that have been done have taken an existing toll road and leased it out to an Australian Spanish consortium.
All right, I've heard all sorts of wild rumors. Let's put them to bed now. That this is going to make a huge toll road. That people in Boulder, if they want to drive down to Denver, are going to have to pay $14 for the right to do it where it's free now. Tell me if I'm right or wrong on this. The reality is, from the public's point of view, it changes nothing except we get a beautiful bus lane, HOT lane, finally built going up towards Boulder, which helps helps transit and helps carpoolers and helps anybody else who shares a ride, and it also helps people who want to buy the way in. But it's exactly what we have now. The free lanes are still going to be free. The toll lane is still going to be tolled. It's just going to be longer and better. I got that right, don't I?
That's right. And what I was afraid of was that they were going to build that extra lane and use it only for buses, and then it would be horribly underutilized. This way, anybody can use it if they're willing to pay a toll. If you don't want to pay a toll, you use the free lanes. And so you'll make a judgment every day. How much time do I have to get to where I want to go? How much traffic is there? If the traffic's bad enough and I'm really pressed for time, then I'll pay the toll. Lanes like this in California, they interviewed people and they said, oh, this is just only the rich are using them. And somebody said, I'm not rich, I don't make very much money, but I put my kids in daycare and they charge me $5 a minute for every minute I'm late picking them up, and I have 2 kids. So it's worth it to pay $9 for a toll to save 1 minute on being late to pick up my kids.
And what I love about this is that Denver is building 2 different transit systems. One going south and pretty much every place else on steel wheels, and one of the best, arguably the best transit line in the country from Boulder to Denver is going to get even better, even faster, even more frequent with this bus lane. And I hate to do the I told you so, but we told you so. Bus rapid transit is so much more effective, it's so much more fast, and it is and it's frequent. So that's what I get in the corridor where I live, and I'm pretty thrilled about this because we've got this great line now, and it's going to just get better. Whereas on the south and out to all other points, it's going to be slow 1850s technology.
It's actually 1930s technology, but the interesting thing about light rail trains is that they don't fill up very much, but when they do fill up, there's only about 70 seats, less than 70 seats per car, so a lot of people end up having to stand. Whereas on the buses, each bus might have 50 or 60 seats, or you can even have double-decker buses which have 80 seats, and nobody has to stand. They're very comfortable. You can put Wi-Fi in them. You can put in power plugs at very little extra cost to RTD, and then everybody can plug in their device, get free Wi-Fi on their way to work, it's actually the model that's being used in the private sector, where we're seeing companies like Megabus and Bolt Bus, which haven't reached Denver yet but have reached most of the rest of the country, providing low-cost intercity service. Like Amtrak will charge you up to $150 one way to go from Washington to New York on their high-speed train, but you can take Megabus for anywhere from $1 to $8. I went for $17 round trip once.
All right, so for those people who are hearing a lot of disinformation about US 36, should they worry?
You know, I don't know the exact details of the lease, and what I'd be concerned about is what is the risk to the taxpayers if the company that it becomes a private partner fails. And most of these are written so that if there's a failure, it's the company that defaults and the taxpayers aren't at risk at all, and that's the way it should be done here. Aside from that, I don't think there's anything to worry about. You'll get better service, you'll get a better highway because there'll be fewer cars on the free lanes because a lot of those cars will be diverted to the toll lanes.
And the toll lane is always guaranteed to go at full speed. It will never jam up because as it gets heavier, more capacity used, you raise the toll, discouraging it. So it's like having an insurance plan, an insurance program that says we guarantee you a fast riding lane if, even as a single occupant, you need to use it.
And that's right. And the guarantee is typically that they'll refund your toll if it turns out that you end up getting stuck in traffic. But it's very rare that happens.
Let's talk a little bit about these corridors. All right, beyond all the other corporations that make direct money off of RTD and the building of this silly thing, there's a lot of private investors who own land next to these corridors. A lot of them seem to like it. You mentioned before that the new planners, because the old planners got it wrong, the new planners, we're going to get it right, and we're going to put more people close to these corridors. Tell me a little bit about that first. Give me some background, and then tell me why.
For some reason, American planners for at least 80 years have had this fascination with density, the idea that we should all be packed into a small area for some reason or other. And we're in a giant country. All of the urban areas in this country only cover 3% of the land area of the country. And it's even less than that in Colorado.
So if you took all the urban areas, and the suburbs too, right?
Suburbs too, everything.
If you put them all together in one big spot, it would cover 3% of the country.
Yeah,
that's it.
A very tiny.
And what about here in Colorado?
It's about 2% in Colorado.
All right. Here's always my challenge to folks. People who think, oh my God, we got to do something about growth. We got to do something about growth. We got to do something about growth. We got to limit it. The challenge is on the next airplane ride you take across country, I dare you to do nothing but look out the window. That's it. I just want you to look out the window and see really if we're packed up. When traffic gets bad, that's when we start saying we got to do something about growth. But we got all this land. We're not running out of land.
The solution to traffic congestion is low density development, because it's the high densities that cause the congestion. So what's derisively called sprawl is the solution to congestion. The reason why we sprawl is to avoid that congestion. If we didn't have, right now, the average population density of the Denver metro area is about 3,000 people per square mile. If we didn't have any government regulation, we'd never get denser than that, because that's about as dense as you can be without having a lot of congestion. But with Dr. Cog and the urban growth boundary and everything, densities are rising. They're rising particularly fast in Boulder and Denver, but they're also rising in many of the suburbs. And you're going to see a lot more congestion in the future thanks to FasTracks and the sustainability plan, which calls for putting all this high-density development along the corridors, which just happens to be where everybody travels.
People are going to listen to you, and they're going to think, oh my God, this guy's a flat earther. He doesn't quite understand. You're not sophisticated enough to know what the planners know, that when we have to drive to all these places, it causes congestion. If we can get people to live in smaller places or on top of each other and bring up that density, it's good for the economy. It supports new businesses, people go out to restaurants, and that's how people want to live. And then they can use these transit corridors. This is good urban planning.
Well, that's what the urban planners think is good urban planning, but urban economists have looked at the data. Urban planners live in a fantasy world. They never actually look at the data to find out how cities work. Urban economists look at the data and say, how do cities actually work? What results? What happens when you draw an urban growth boundary? What happens when you increase densities? What happens when you pack and stack people into narrow transit corridors? And what happens is most of those people still drive. You can increase population densities 10 times what they are today, and you might get a 20% reduction in per capita driving. Well, do the math. That means you have an 800% increase in driving. And if you don't have 800% more roads, you're going to have a lot more congestion.
Talk to me a little bit about who's behind this. How can this be done? If the market allows for these big buildings to be built in these corridors and people want to live there and they want to live on top of each other, I'm not against that, are you?
I'm not against what the market wants, except the market doesn't want this. The vast majority of Americans of all ages, whether it's baby boomers, empty nesters, or millennials, or whatever, the vast majority of Americans prefer to live in a single-family home on a lot, individual lot, that's detached from other homes. They aspire to that if they don't live in it now. If they live in it now, they want to stay there. retiring baby boomers, who are aging, they want to age in place. They want to die in their own homes. They don't want to be moved to some pack and stack somewhere. Now, there's a few exceptions. There's always some people who want to live in density, but it's a very small percentage.
Then why are they building all this stuff if there's not a market for it?
They're building all this stuff because the planners think it's better to be packed into denser areas. And
in other words,
ask why.
You have no other choice. You're not allowed to build where you want to build.
Yeah, you ask why they think that, and they say, oh, it saves farmland. But there's enormous amounts. There's 2.5 times as much farmland as we actually farm in this country. They say we need to reduce global warming, but it turns out this doesn't do anything to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, many of these things, such as rail transit, actually exacerbate greenhouse gas emissions.
All right, say that again, because everyone looks at the choo-choo trains and go, clean electric transportation.
Yeah, well, where does that electricity come from? It comes from burning coal. But the point is that they want to pack and stack development in these narrow corridors. Most of the people in those dense developments are going to still drive, and so you're going to have a lot more traffic on all the highways in the region. And who's in favor of this? Well, the planners are, obviously, but the developers like it, because guess what? It's not feasible to build those developments, and so the planners are subsidizing it.
How are they subsidizing it?
They're using what's called tax increment financing as the main form of subsidy, but there are others. Sometimes they'll buy land and then give it to the developers. They'll buy a piece of land for $1 million and give it to developers for $10. Sometimes they'll get federal grants. There's all sorts of ways of subsidizing it. Stapleton, for example, is a high-density development, received almost $300 million in subsidies.
$300 million. All right, let's go to the other extreme. We look at Los Angeles and people go, blah. All it is an asphalt jungle. There's, you want traffic, there's traffic. You say that the planners don't know what they're doing and you should let the market do it. Well, there's one city that does that, and Houston is it. And most people look at Houston with a bit of disdain. Why?
Well, you mentioned Los Angeles. That's the densest urban area in the United States. It does have a lot of traffic because it has the fewest numbers of miles of freeway per capita of any major urban area. And so you have too many people with too few roads to drive on, and it's extremely congested. Houston is the opposite. It's less than 3,000 people per square mile. It's growing fast. It's growing faster than the city of Boulder every single year. In fact, about every 6 months it grows by the size of the city of Boulder. For the Houston metropolitan area.
Really? There's 100,000 new people that come into Houston every year or so?
Yes, 120,000 people a year in the Houston metropolitan area. And it has very little regulation. Typically, developers will buy 10,000 acres of land. They'll put in all the infrastructure, sewers, waters, roads, and everything. They'll sell lots, and you can buy a lot and get all the permits and build on it and move in within 120 days of when you bought your lot. Whereas in places that are more regulated, it can take up to 5 or 6 years to do that.
Talk to a builder in Boulder how long it takes to get a shovel in the ground.
Exactly.
Hey, we've only got a couple minutes left. I want to look towards the future. Something that you talked about years ago and everyone giggled. They're still mostly giggling, but it's a little less. It's this idea of driverless cars. The idea that people who are handicapped can have a taxi service without a taxi driver, that when we get on roads, we won't have to drive and it'll somehow be safer.
Nissan has promised a driverless car on the market by 2020. You can buy cars today for less than $30,000, medium price cars that have 99% of driverless technology built in. They can detect cars in front of you and control the speed to mimic the speed of the car in front of you. They can detect the lanes and steer between the stripes so that you don't have to steer. They can do a lot of the driving for you, but totally driverless cars are only about 6 years away. And
what's the advantage?
The advantage is that you'll be able to work when you're in your car. It's a lot safer.
How can it be safer? You really want Microsoft Windows in charge of my life?
No, of course. I want Apple in charge of my life. But
still, the idea of a software package compared to a human hand on a wheel, I'm old-fashioned. That makes me nervous.
Your reflexes are getting slow, John. and they weren't that fast to begin with, whereas my computer's reflexes are a lot faster. And because of those faster human reflexes, we'll be able to pack 3 to 4 times as many cars on an existing mile of road, which means there'll be a lot less congestion.
Because when I was a kid, they said, "What do? You count to 5 or something when you pass it?"
You have to have 6 car lengths in front of
between.
you,
Yeah, I mean,
to go 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, and you get kind of that vibe of you're too close, you're too far.
Yeah.
So if this works, we're on each other's bumpers.
There'll be 1 car length between us at 60 miles an hour. It's been proven. They've done actual tests of real cars driving at 60 miles an hour, and one of them goes a little bit slow, the other one just passes them or whatever. 10 cars in a row, 1 car length apart. We know we can do this. The technology is there. Google has driven his car 400,000 miles in California, Nevada, and Washington, D.C., and other places. Only one accident took place when somebody rear-ended them at a stoplight. They've had a blind person at the wheel. I'll be able to put my dog in a car and send it to the vet, so I don't have to go with the dog.
So in other words, what we're talking about is drones with wheels.
You could call it that. You could call it that. I mean, go to YouTube and just search for driverless cars. Volkswagen has a great thing called the valet parking car on YouTube, where you drive up to your restaurant or work or whatever, get out of your car and say, "Car, go park yourself." And it just drives away until it finds an empty parking place and parks itself. And when you're done, you just pull out your smartphone and you say, "Car, come," and it starts itself up and comes and picks you up. Now, if you don't want to pay for parking, you can have your car go get the oil changed, or you can put it out on the market and get other people to hire your car from you.
Right. This is going to happen.
This is going to happen. It's going to transform everything, and it's going to render transit totally obsolete. Not just light rail, but buses too.
I can't wait. Real quickly, people want to get more information. We've got 10 seconds. Where do they go?
Cato.org or ti.org is my blog, The Anti-Planner. And I've got a lot of articles.
Thank you. ti.org. I'm Jon Caldara. Tell a friend. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.